Wizards banned Undercity Informer in Legacy. This is a big change. I mean, it's really sad for the Oops players. I hope the deck still works for them, but for us, it's really, really exciting. So for people who don't remember which is which, Undercity Informer is the 3-mana one where you have to pay 1 and you cannot consign to memory it. And Balustrade Spy is the 4-mana one which you can consign. This one is still legal. Undercity Informer, the 3-mana one is banned, and this is very exciting for us because we have been playing surgical extractions for a long time, even though it doesn't really synergize with our deck. I mean, we can get it back with Tamio, but that's pretty much it, and it is one half of turning on flow state, right? But other than Blue-Red Delver, where it flips Delver or triggers Dragon's Rage Channeler, it's not really that much of a synergy here, and it's also not much of a cross-hate against fair matches. So surgical extraction, I mean, of course, you can, for example, against Uro heavy control decks, get rid of the Uro, or against lands, you can get rid of the life from the loam or the life from the loam targets, and of course it works against reanimate targets if they don't have 2 in the graveyard in Shallow Grave, or like you can take the Tassa's Oracle maybe against the Cephalid Breakfast deck if they don't find the Cabal Therapy and guess correctly first, and so on. Of course, against all the graveyard combo decks, it's great, but also to varying levels. For example, against Dredge, I feel it's often not good enough because they just get so much stuff into the graveyard that it's usually not enough. So let's look at some options we have. Of course, we could also like take out the graveyard hate altogether and play with like no or only 1 graveyard hate cards, which can maybe work a bit better in blue-red tempo because you can just close out the game really fast. But blue-black tempo usually has to win over the course of a lot of turns, and so you usually need the right tools for the job. So I'm continuing for now with 2 pieces of graveyard hate. So let's see what we have available and what are the pros and cons. So this is the graveyard hate section in the blue-black tempo guide, and please write in the comments if you actually read this guide thingy, because it's already 71 pages long. I've put a lot of work into it, but I'm not sure if anyone ever reads it. But so we have multiple options, right? So let's go through some of them. So it's still from the before Oops was nerfed category, so stops Oops completely was an important part of the equation here. So let's start with Leyline of the Voids. So Leyline of the Void. So Leyline of the Void is usually better in non-blue decks because there the opening hand is much more important. It's more common that you mulligan a lot to find your hate pieces, whereas with the tempo decks or in general the fair blue ponder brainstorm decks, it's more common that you ponder or brainstorm or flow state into your hate pieces, and this does not work with Leyline. So I'm not really a fan of Leyline in blue-black tempo for this reason. But it is very good against Oops because they don't have many ways to combat it. I mean, sometimes they have this green colorless or like 1 green and 1 generic enchantment removal spell where you can also give the opponent a card, I think. But in general, it's really, really strong because they cannot just take it out with a discard spell beforehand. So most of the cards that sit in your hand, like Surgical or Fairy Macabre, they're weak to discard spells, and Leyline is not. And I really like it against Dredge, but I haven't played much against Dredge recently online. So maybe if you go to a local like 10 persons event and there are like 5 Dredge players, then maybe you can think about Leyline of the Void, but in general I would avoid it. Then there is Fairy Macabre, which can be found with Barrowgolf because it's a creature. I mean, it's more of a niche thing, right? It's a combat trick for Nethergolf, which actually came up. I think there was a really crazy challenge game a while ago against Godic Hans Jakob Kaiser, I think, where Homazon was in the Discord and found this great line of like shrinking the opponent's Goif, and then we could go for the win. So this is the only card that is in your hand, like surgical, but it's not casting spells, so you can get around cards like Teferi from Cephalid Breakfast, which I don't know if they still play Teferi anymore. I saw some recent lists from Larson where Teferi was not included. And there's also, I used to play Cephalid Breakfast, and I loved this one line where you could play around Fairy Macabre, which was you play Teferi, you uptick it, and then you can cast your stuff at instant speeds. Then you go for the Nomad and Illusionist combo, mill your whole library, and then you probably get your Narcomoebas in, and then you go for the Cabal Therapy, which, I mean, now that they don't play Nadu, they probably play black again and have one Cabal Therapy. And then the opponent has to use their Fairy if they don't. Hope you guess wrong, but I mean, against Teferi in play, there isn't really much else, right? And at that point, they have to use the Fairy, and then you just dread return on top of that in instant speed. So yeah, I know it doesn't come up that often, but it certainly did come up for me when I played Cephalid Breakfast. But in general, outside of this very niche scenario, I think it's really strong against graveyard combo decks with counter magic. That's why we played 2 in the sideboard in the Tempo Reanimator era before the Entomb ban, so it's good against this one. Cephalid Breakfast. So if Cephalid Breakfast ever comes back, this is when I was playing Breakfast. This always gave me nightmares. I was often thinking, I have a Daze, I have a Force, I have everything covered except the stupid Fairy. And I mean, sure, you could mill into your Narcomoebas and Cabal Therapy before you mill the Tazza's Oracle, but that's like doesn't always happen, right? So yeah, Fairy Macabre right now I'm not using it, but keep it in mind. I wouldn't sell them or take it out of your legacy binder. It certainly has earned its permanent spot in my legacy binder if like fair blue or in general like graveyard combo decks with counter magic come back, then Fairy is great again. Then, it also cannot be hit by Pact of Negation. That's also important to know. So I don't actually know why we did play Surgical in the sideboard and not Fairy, because not getting hit by Pact of Negation is also not bad. But I have to say, Surgical, that you can get it back with Tamio is really nice, and yeah, sometimes you can also use it as like a cross hate against like stuff like Doomsday or Sneak and Show, where you counter it, and then you can just permanently remove a win condition from the opponent's deck. So I had this recently against Lance, interestingly, where I took out their Urza Saga and their Dark Depths, and then they had no real win condition, and I thought they would surrender, but it was just getting really close. I nearly decked myself and like had to go for Tamio Ultimate, and then I went to like 3 life, and they had a 0-1 token from Rumble equipped with a skateboard. It was really a crazy game. But nowadays the problem with this like surgicling against non-graveyard combo decks, the problem is they often have so much like hybrid stuff that you usually cannot bring it in. So I never bring in Surgical against Doomsday nowadays, because they usually bought in stuff like Murktide or Barrowgolf, so you usually have to keep in some removal. Even Sneak and Show, there you bring in the Hydroblasts and maybe even Snuff out or 2, depending on how many Hydroblasts you have. So you can have something against like Vexing Squalcher, Hexing Squalcher, I hate this name. And then against Green Blue Omni Show, maybe you have the space there to bring it in, but yeah, not that much of a cross section. Then there's the Fair Graveyard Hate, but let's talk about because that's most of them. Let's talk about Gravedigger's Cage. So Gravedigger's Cage, I think it's really nice when you have like a local paper meta game with lots of Storm and maybe Mystic Forge, but like the Forge decks usually online are mostly Tron, where it doesn't help, but like when you actual factual Mystic Forge gets stopped by Gravedigger's Cage. And so, but against Storm, I often have this problem that the normal Grave hate, like Surgical or Fairy or like Nihil Spellbomb, doesn't work against the Echo lines, because usually what they do is they discard their Echo or they discard their Runehorn Hellkite with Lion's Eye Diamond. And the way Magic works is it's on their turn, they get priority, and they just use the card and you cannot respond because then the Echo is already on the stack, right? And stuff like Gravedigger's Cage just prevents the flashback ability. So if someone in your local meta is still playing good old Ad Nauseam Tendrils Aunt with like Past in Flames, also works against that. Or Geas will, right? But not Besiege the Mirror itself. So if they see Gravedigger's Cage in play, they can just grab something else. But it also stops Green Sun Zenith and Natural Order. So yeah, it's good again if your local meta has like Cradle Control, Storm, Elves, and the actual factual Mystic Forge. And then we go to the value stuff, which is also playable against like tempo or like graveyard synergistic decks or hybrid decks, right? So for example, tempo decks I think are really graveyard dependent right now. And so I'm mostly interested in that. So before that, it was too risky to like switch your surgicals to spell bombs. I mean, you could still try it, but then it would be dangerous against Oops. But now you have more of a freedom to use this. And as I'm currently playing the Nethergolf version, I'm a big fan of Nihil Spellbomb because it buffs Nethergolf. And I really like the ability to like just pop it at a great moment for you. So you have this like fly trap where you can just lead your opponent's Dragon's Rage Channeler to attack you, and then in the block, this would be wrong. You have to do it in the attack step. In the attack step, you pop the Nihil Spellbomb, and then you can just block the Dragon's Rage Channeler with your Nethergolf or Orc Army token or whatever, because at that point it's just a 1/1 that does not fly, and it cantrips, so you draw a card. I mean, it can get sometimes a bit tricky because sometimes the opponent has a mix of like Dragon's Rage Chandler and the Murktide, and then you have to think, well, is it worth it killing the Darcy if I pump my opponent's Murktide by 5 or something? But yeah, it can also grow your own Murktide Regent in a pinch, like if you're sometimes you can get lethal on board by removing your own graveyard. If you play it together with Nilrod, then you cannot use it, of course, if that's in place. And in the graveyard heavy meta, where like Entomb was still legal, we played it in the main board actually instead of the Mishra's Bauble, but I think right now it's not a good idea. I tried having one Nihil Spellbomb, or was it even two, in one of the first challenges, also published on YouTube after the after the flow state releases, and was just much too clunky against the other matchups, right? If you play against Sneak and Show or Tron, then the speed matters so much. You have no time to like 2 mana do nothing. It's really, really bad. So yeah, it's great against blue-black tempo, especially if they play Nethergolf. You can prevent Murktides and shrink the Nethergolf, so it's really, really strong if you have big Nethergolfs and they have small Nethergolfs, of course. Against blue-red, then like hybrid decks like Cephalid Breakfast, it's really, really strong. Like in the Nadu times, for example, you maybe didn't even have the luxury to bring in stuff like Surgical Extraction or Fairy Macabre, just because their mid-range plan with Nadu was super strong and they could just focus on that. But right now, I guess Zephyr Breakfast, depending on if this ever gets played again in significant numbers and if it gets more of combo or more of a mid-range hybrid version. Then depends if you want to bring in the hardcore Grave Hate, but Nihil's Spellbomb's always great, right? Also, if in doubt, like, let's say you play against a control deck and it has only 1 or 2 Oros, so maybe you would think, well, against a single Oro, Surgical is not really worth it, or against Murktide and Nihil's Spellbomb, it just cantrips, the game go along anyways, so games go along anyways, so it's good there. Then we have Ghost Vacuum, which I find sometimes a bit too slow. So especially like against Blue-Red, if they have Dragon's Rage Channeler, then sometimes they can just put so much stuff in the graveyard that it's often not enough to prevent the Murktide Regent or even Delirium sometimes. So, and having the 6 mana for the, I call it the ultimates, also a bit unrealistic, so I'm not a big fan of Ghost Vacuum, at least in the Nethergolf version. So if you play with Barrowgolf main, maybe you can experiment with that, but until now I haven't really been that that impressed by the card. And Unlicensed Hearse, I think it's really good if you play an Ancient Tomb deck, but I think having 2 mana is just too much. I mean, it's really cool if you get it in play, because at that point you can just at that point you're really likely that you can prevent Delirium or prevent them from playing the Murktide Regent. Also, if it's like a hybrid deck and they pivot away to something else, or they go for some other plan, then you can still at some point just attack for like 10 or something with your 10/10 Unlicensed Hearse Crude. So this is really nice. But yeah, I'm not really much of a fan of Unlicensed Hearse as well. And then there's Doughty Voidwalker. So maybe this one is better with the Barrowgolf build. I'm going to try Doughty Voidwalker one-off, but I'm also not much of a fan, because I think Blue-Red will profit a lot, because Oops was difficult for them and quite more easy to handle for Blue-Black with the Thoughtseizes especially. So Doughty Voidwalker, I think it's quite difficult, because you want to fetch basics against Blue-Red, and then they can just, then it's hard to get double black, and they can also bolt it really easily and so on. So if you get it to stick early, it's great. And I also really like it against, like, it has some cross hate. For example, against Sneak and Show, if you can discard your opponent's Omniscience or Emrakul or something. That's I think it's really fun to have it. I'm not sure if it's the best option, but I really like it because it's fun. Yeah. And I think that was everything here. So let's go back to our list. So for now, I'm going to try here one Doughty Voidwalker and one Nihil Spellbomb, but maybe I switch later to 2 Nihil Spellbombs, because that's grows the Nethergolf, and I think it's more easy. I think with the Nethergolf version, sometimes you really want to play on basics, especially now that we don't play Hymn anymore. So I think it's much easier to cast. But for now, I'm interested in that. And also, I think now we don't, maybe with less Oops, maybe we also need less Conscience. So I'm interested in beating the Tron deck, but I think lands will also profit a lot. So in general, slower decks. So what I'm actually going to try is I want to try one Damping Sphere, because I think the people who go off Oops maybe go into stuff like other combo decks like Storm, and I think Damping Sphere is really interesting because it's great against Storm. It also is useful against Tron, like they cannot just chain like 10 artifacts in a round, and makes their like Tron lands and maybe Cloud Posts if they still play Cloud Post just every land just does 1 mana, right? And then I'm also going to try Harbinger. So I'm off Harbinger for a long time, but I think like lands and depths and general like slow land strategies can't come back. And so this is like the damping spheres overlap, like Storm and Tron, and Harbinger is like lands and Tron overlap. And yeah, we could also try Nilrod, but I think this is not widely. I mean, it works against Storm, right, really, really well, because the current Storm builds are quite artifact heavy, unlike like the past Nauseam Tendrils with the 4 Cabal Ritual. But yeah, I think online in leagues Nilrod doesn't hit enough stuff. Force of Negation could also try, but I think especially against lands, I want to give Harbinger a chance. It's one of my favorite cards. Flusterstorm, I think, too narrow. I mean, it's good against Sneak and lots of Doomsday probably being played, so maybe we can revisit Flusterstorm later. But for now, I want to try configuration like this, and I will try it in a league, and yeah, let's see. But yeah, I'm happy to get your comments how you will switch out your sideboard or your main deck in your blue-black tempo build. So hope you like it, and see you later. And yeah, I'm going to play a league with this.